Today is Friday, April 25th, 2014, and we are in Bellingham, Massachusetts. This tape is part of the Bellingham Mendon Veterans Oral History Project. My name is Marjorie Turner Holman, and our cameraman is Eric Fisher of ABMI Cable 8 TV. We are privileged to have with us today Tom Donnelly of Bellingham, Mass. Tom, would you please tell us your full name and your birth date?
Thomas G. Donnelly was born on August the 24th, 1935.
And could you tell us about members in your family who have served in the military, Tom?
Oh, my father served in the British Army under the, trying to remember, it was the Fusiliers. That's all that I remember about it. But he apparently served in Crete, apparently during one of their conflagrations, and I had my brother, who was older than I. He served in World War II, and he flew in the B-25 bomber, and he was a tail gunner, and also he was a bombardier at one time. And he was in the European operations. The bombers that he was in, they flew from North Africa or from England and different places. And I have very little knowledge of the exact operations that he did. He died some years ago, and I found in his possessions a little diary, and some of the information that I got from his diary indicated that he had been in the operations to bomb the ball bearing plants in Czechoslovakia or Poland or whatever, and a major site in Poland was the Ploesti oil fields. That was a major source of fuel for the German army, and he had shown me pictures some years ago that were taken of some of these bombers when they come back from operations and how much they had been damaged. The ones that did return, a lot of them didn't return, but it's unbelievable the amount of damage that can be done to an airplane and still fly. I mean, some of these aircraft were literally full of holes, and like I say, it's amazing that they survived the trip back. But he was wounded. I can't tell you exactly how he got wounded, but he had a large piece of shrapnel in his back, and he spent some time in the Veterans Hospital in West Roxbury, Massachusetts, and but when he went in the service, he was very young. I think he was 17 or 18, not exactly sure. It was early during the war effort, and he tried to be a pilot. He wanted to be a pilot, went through flight school in Texas, and he didn't pass because of his eyesight. So he got assigned to a gunner and so on and so forth. But being at an early age, you know, and knowing him, we were very close together, even though he was older than I. He was 14 years older than I. We were very close and used to spend an awful lot of time together. When he'd come home from school, we'd go together over to the Arboretum in Jamaica Plain, and he would study, and I would play with the dog while he studied. And then we'd walk back home again. And we did that numerous times. And we skied over in the Arboretum during the winter season. And but he was a changed individual when he came back. And he had made a trip back to Europe. I don't remember what year it was that he went back, and he was very, very upset about it, to see the damage that had been done by his aircraft and others in Europe, the cities, etc., that were bombed out. So the war had a very deleterious effect on him, and never really spoke a lot about it, but it was quite evident that he didn't like it.
Well, talk to us about some of your experience of how old you were when you joined the military and why you did choose the Navy.
Well, I was, excuse me, I was 17. I was in high school, in my third year of high school. I was in an industrial arts program, which is a 5-year course. You had to complete 5 years, which meant the last year you would have to work in industry in that occupation to obtain your diploma. In the third year, I joined the Naval Reserve. I don't remember exactly how that happened, through suggestion or whatever. A few of my friends joined as well. And we used to go to meetings in Hingham at the old ammunition depot. And during that period of time, I had an opportunity to go to boot camp during the summer between my third and fourth year. And I took that opportunity. And we went to Bainbridge, Maryland. That's a major training facility for the Navy. And I spent the summer there going through the training, etc. And we had all types of activities, firing range with .22 caliber rifles, firefighting, drilling, school work and classroom work, and various requirements. And it was really a good year. We actually had a Liberty during that summer. We went to Baltimore on a trip to Baltimore, just like we were in the regular Navy. So it was quite an experience at that time. And during my senior year, I made a decision to go on active duty as soon as I could. The soonest that I could leave school and still get a diploma, and I would get a diploma if I had joined the service. I wouldn't have had to spend that year in industry. So I opted to take the opportunity. The earliest would have been May of 1954. And I signed the papers to go on active duty. And my orders came through fairly quick, and I reported to the 1st Naval District headquarters in Boston, Mass, on Summer Street. And I was assigned a bunk and all of the regular things that go on, some additional uniform parts. So at what they call the Fargo building in Boston was the 1st Naval District headquarters. Was myself and one of my friends. So we were assigned to, keep certain areas of the building clean and spotless. We had to do the floors, we had to do the windows and the bathrooms, clean the toilets, and just about anything to make everything was clean. We had to have white glove inspection because they'd come through at any time and they'd check, make sure everything was spotless.
Was
So,
this boot camp, or was
no,
this a
no, I had already been
you
through
had
boot
already,
camp
oh,
in
okay.
in Bainbridge, Maryland, during
Oh.
the prior year,
Oh, okay.
as part of a Naval Reserve program.
We have a picture of you from boot camp, so why don't we get, there you are.
Yeah, that was my first official photograph of being in the Navy. Um, the the tour at the Fargo building in Boston got to be pretty blasé, cleaning every day. And my family lived in Dedham at the time. So when I was off duty, I would go home to Dedham on the train.
It seemed to me you said something about getting into the service so you could get away from home.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things. It was just my mother and I at home at that time. My mother and father were separated, but never divorced. But my father had spent some time away from the family right after the Second World War. So I didn't really have a father figure at home. My brother was kind of a quasi-father figure. He was always around to make sure that I towed the line, etc. But I found myself hanging around the street corners, late at night. No real direction. Yeah, we played the usual sports, tag football and make-up baseball and what have you, but a lot of us were just basically hanging around schoolyards and not doing anything constructive. And I had the experience of traveling with my brother, who was a photographer for the Boston Post. And I used to travel with him on many occasions. I think it was basically so he could keep an eye on me. And I wanted to travel. I wanted to, see other parts of the world. And there was no way that I could do it on our family's budget. We just didn't even have a budget at that time. And my mother worked in a laundromat, and we had no car. So things were not very optimistic for the future. So I decided that possibly if I went into the service, then things would have gotten a little bit brighter.
So you got stationed to this Fargo building in Boston, but after that you ended up on the Coral Sea. Can you tell us about how that happened and
Right. After a lengthy stay at the Fargo building, I figured that I had learned everything there was to know about cleaning toilets and washing floors, cleaning windows. And I asked the officer of the day when I was going to get orders, to go. I didn't expect that I was going to go on shipboard or where I was going to go. And that's something that the Navy doesn't tell you. They don't tell you. I did request it. I did request to go on board ship, but you never have any guarantees. I also requested to be a machinist mate because that's what I was trained to be in my occupation services in the high school. I would learn machine shop work, and I liked it. So anyway, I asked the officer of the deck when I was going to get my orders to ship out. And he says, I don't know, but I'll try to find out and get some idea. Oh, a couple of weeks went by, and he came back to me, and he said, your orders will be coming soon. So another few weeks went by, and by this time the floors in that place were shining like diamonds, and I was afraid somebody's going to slip on them. They were so shiny. So I saw the chaplain one day, and I asked him, I says, Father, can you see what you can do about getting me out of here? I says, I've been waiting a long time. It was actually probably about 3 months, 2 or 3 months. In the meantime, my friend had gotten shipped out, weeks earlier, and he was assigned to the old USS Mississippi. So anyway, the chaplain came back to me and he said basically the same thing that the officer of the deck said. Your orders are coming through and you'll get them pretty soon. So it was probably a week after that my orders came through, and to report to Mayport, Florida. It's right near Jacksonville, and report to the USS Coral Sea. I didn't even know that it was an aircraft carrier. So I made my way with a group of other people, and we went to Jacksonville, Florida, and I reported to the security gate at the base, and they told me that they'd checked my papers, and they told me that the ship was right outside the gate. So I was fine. I stepped outside, and I looked, and I couldn't see anything. I could see a ship way down at the end of the pier. So I figured that's probably it. So I was going to go through the gate, and the guard says to me, he says, "Where are you headed to?" And I says, "The Coral Sea." "Oh," he says, "well, you're right here." And I looked, and all I could see was this field of blue, like a blue-gray. And I says, "Where?" And he looked at me kind of funny. And I says, "Where is the Coral Sea?" He says, "You're looking at it." He says, "Look up." So I looked up, and that was my first indication of how large the Coral Sea was. I was really stunned. So he told me where to go to the walkway at the far end of the ship, and of course you're carrying a sea bag, and so I went on board the ship, and I took the necessary things. They don't show you around the ship. They don't take you on a guided tour. They just take you to where you're going to live. They introduce you to, no, this is so-and-so. And at that time, I was a seaman apprentice. I had gained a stripe between the time I joined the reserves. And I was assigned to the captain's division, X division, which I thought was kind of really impressive. So the bosun mate in charge of the compartment where I was going to live sat down and told me what my responsibilities were. And at that time, I was alone. And he told me that my responsibilities were to keep the floor clean, make sure there was no dust or anything else in the corners, and that I would have to do laundry and so on and so forth. He didn't go into a lot of details. He just said, these are your responsibilities, And so, again, I was back in the realm of being a compartment cleaner.
We have a picture of you on board ship with, is that your whole unit? What do you
That's
call
the whole
that?
division. That's the X division.
Okay.
Yeah, and
And
they have
that's,
varying responsibilities.
and that's you in the front right-hand
In the
corner?
front row right, I was second from the end.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went through that picture the other day trying to figure out names, and I think I got about 15. About 15 names of people that I could remember.
Well, tell us some of your duties. You were starting to tell us some of your duties when you were on board ship.
Well, the duties that I primarily had were to clean the floors. They always had to be cleaned, at least once or twice a day. And there were 20 odd men living in that compartment. They were stacked 6 high. The racks, as we called them at the time, they were nothing more than an aluminum rectangular frame with a piece of canvas and the rope around the frame to hold the canvas. Then we had a mattress that was probably an inch and a half thick. I don't know what they were made of, but you could roll them. They were that thin. And these racks could be flipped up so you could do the floors and everything. You didn't have to get down underneath it. You could flip them up, and they would, like as high as you needed to wash the floors. And these fellas all slept in these things. The guy in the top rack had to climb up, to the sixth level, and there was approximately 18 to 20 inches between each rack. And cleaning the floors, and sometimes the job that I disliked the most was polishing lockers. I had a dislike for the odor of Noxon. You know what Noxon is? I don't think they even sell it today, but it has an abrasive in it. And it's liquid, but when you put it on and you rub it, and they liked to see the scrolls when you polish the locker. They like to see these scrolls, not just a sweep thing. So it stands out, believe it or not. The scrolls really look nice when the lockers are polished. But then it dries and you have to polish all of this stuff off. It makes a lot of sense not to wash the floor before you polish the lockers, because this stuff just goes everywhere. It becomes dust. So polishing the lockers, and then we had the laundry detail. Well, we had bags that were approximately, I would say 6 or 7 feet long, about 2 feet in diameter. And they hung in the living compartment, and everybody threw their laundry in there. And we would get a call as to when our appointed laundry detail would take the laundry, and sometimes we had 2, sometimes 3 bags that we had to haul from where our compartment was, which was in the front end of the ship in what we call the forecastle, which was like in the bow. And we were the last compartment in that forward end of the ship. And we had to take the laundry to the tail end of the ship. And the carrier was, almost 1,000 feet long. So you can imagine we had to carry those bags. The other thing I forgot to mention is shortly after I was there, like 2 or 3 days, there's another young fellow, a black boy. He came in, and he was my partner in keeping the compartment clean. And we got along very well. Everything worked fine. So anyway, getting back to the laundry, we would carry the laundry down to where the laundry was. And we'd just throw it on the deck and sit and wait until we got the call. And when we got the call, we would take the bags down. I think it was one deck, if I remember correctly, one deck down to the laundry. And fortunately, the people that worked there, they would take the clothing out of the bags, and we would take the bags back with us up to the deck where we were. It was the hangar bay. And we would wait until the laundry was done. Sometimes this would take 2 or 3 hours. But the laundry was immense. I mean, they had machines that would do the washing that were about 10 or 12 feet long, like huge baskets. And then they had these huge extractors that are about 4 feet in diameter. And then when the laundry was done, they would call us. We'd take the bags back down, and we'd put the dried laundry in there and haul it back to the living compartment. And then our job, was to take the laundry out piece by piece and sort it onto the varying racks that the people. Every piece of laundry is labeled with the owner's name on it. And if it wasn't, it goes in what they call the lucky bag. It's available to anybody. So we would sort all of that laundry out, and it took quite a bit of time. And but we weren't doing the laundry every other day or whatever. So we would distribute all of that laundry, and then, of course, we had some free time, and we were fortunate that right next to our living compartment was the ship's library. So we spent a lot of the free time there because there was no place to sit in the living compartment. So you had to make your free time outside. But it was good. We played softball in the hangar deck. We played tennis, basketball. They had weightlifting equipment. Some people, there weren't too many runners back in those days, not like there is today. But occasionally you'd see a guy running. But every once in a while we'd get the opportunity to get some fresh air. We'd go up on the hangar deck when there wasn't any flight operations. And one thing the Navy is adamant about is that you are the property of the United States government. And you take care of yourself. You don't get sunburned. So they did allow us to do some sunbathing, but that was a rare occasion. And if you get sunburned, you'd pay for it. I had the experience of my first trip to Cuba. I went and played golf at Guantanamo Bay, and I got a serious sunburn. And I didn't report it, but a friend of mine who was a corpsman took care of me and, made sure that I didn't get put on report for getting a sunburn. But it was the worst sunburn I ever had in my life, because we had no suntan oil or anything, Some of the fellas in the Navy, they used to use baby oil and iodine. They'd mix it together and, put it on themselves like an instant tan, right? But I think what was happening is they would actually get burned because of the type of oil that they were using, But
Now, I understand you had clerical duties? Was that?
yeah, probably. I served a term while I was compartment cleaner. I had an extra duty.
There you are.
Yeah, that's the personnel office. I was a clerk in the personnel office. I used to do leave rations and transfers for people leaving the ship and coming aboard, so on and so forth. And occasionally we would have a group of, or a squadron that would come aboard the ship. And all of their people, their mechanics, their support people, would have transfer papers. And they would have their own clerks, but, we would help them out to do some of the paperwork. And I was assigned, when I was aboard ship, about a year and a half, I was assigned to the Master-at-Arms Department, which is the ship's police force, and I was their clerk. And I used to muster prisoners and keep the records of the prisoners for the captain's mast. Captain's mast is like when you go to court, and the captain will hear your story and he would sentence you. And I had to keep track of those records and the prisoners. I would go down into the brig and, talk to the prisoners, ask them questions about their case and so on and so forth, preparing them for the captain's mast. Then the day that the captain was going to hear their case, they would be brought up as a group, whoever the captain was going to hear, and the Marines would actually guard them. The Marines guarded the brig all the time. So they would bring them all along, and then if they were relieved by the captain, their papers would have to be changed. They'd go back to their group, their division, whatever, and then the others that were sentenced for other duty, they would go back to the brig. And they would be relieved at certain times to work in various places aboard ship. It might be cleaning, it might be chipping paint and painting, might be a garbage detail or something. A lot of them did a lot of their extra duty in the mess hall. Some of them did cooking, some of them cleaning, etc. So that's what I did during that period of time.
Well, you mentioned the Marines on board ship, but you were in the Navy. Help us understand how that worked, the role the Marines played on shipboard.
Yeah, most large ships have a small contingent of Marines. Their responsibility was to guard the captain and the executive officer or any high-ranking officer that was aboard the ship. Being a large carrier, we were one of the lead carriers in the group that we were in. It's called an attack group. There were 3 carriers and transports and submarines, certain types of aircraft that would cover the ships, and sometimes we would have a admiral aboard or a chief of operations. These were high-ranking admirals that would be aboard the ship, and I had the opportunity of seeing their living conditions because I had to bring papers to the captain's office compartment from time to time, and they lived a pretty good life. They're all mahogany furniture and everything. It was pretty nice. But the Marines guarded the captain no matter where he was on board ship. Even if he was in his living compartments, they would be standing outside the door. Nobody get in or out without them knowing it. And the executive officer as well. The captain, excuse me, the captain's living compartments was up just under the flight deck, and the executive officer's compartment was down below ship, down on the second level in the rear of the ship. And I think that was intentional, so in the event that anything happened. Both of the major officers, wouldn't be injured. So we basically, we had a second contingent of Marines on board, and I believe the numbers were 100, 150, and these were combat Marines, and it was considered like a landing force. If there was some insurrection or something that we had to put men ashore, that was their job. They would go. But the ship's company Marines would never be part of that. But the only time that I recall having the Marine group go ashore was in Egypt, and that story is later on.
Yes, that's what my next question was, that you served during the Suez Canal crisis. And can you tell us a little bit about what that crisis was about and how it affected you while you were in the service?
Well, the Suez Canal crisis, and I'm not very clear about how it started, but I believe that the Egyptians tried to close off the Suez Canal to prevent shipping. And the canal is a very highly used waterway. All of the shipping that comes through from the Indian Ocean, et cetera, into the Mediterranean, they don't have to go down around the Cape of Africa to get access to to the North American continent or the South American continent. They'd go through the canal and through the Mediterranean. But I believe it started with the Egyptians. And somehow or other, the French and the British got involved in this conflict. And the only effect that we had on us were that we were called to general quarters on a regular basis. Anytime there was a ship that had approached anywhere near us, or an aircraft, we would be called to general quarters.
And what does general quarters mean?
General quarters means that everyone on board the ship has a station that is not their normal workstation. And they have to report to that station. And my station was actually, my station was in like damage control. I was a phone operator. On board the ship, they had these headphones that were like, they didn't operate electrically. They operated like, well, they do, in this essence, they were electric, but they were sound-powered phones. They only activated with your voice. And my station was on the second deck below the hangar deck. And each person that arrives at that station from battle quarters or general quarters, some of them may be people to transfer ammunition to a gun turret. They may be an operator for the gun turret. They may be rescue personnel that would man a lifeboat if necessary. All the different requirements for that ship to have watertight integrity. Every compartment on that ship was sealed. In other words, in this room, all the doors would be shut and sealed, so that if, in effect, a missile or torpedo or something hit the ship and water could come in, it would be contained in that compartment. And some of these compartments weren't very large, but the one that I was assigned to was probably, I would say maybe 10 feet, 12 feet in diameter, in size. And in that compartment they had valves that can be shut off to shut off air supply or anything that needed to be shut off. And I was the phone operator, so I would take orders from the damage control central, and each compartment had a number. Let's say, for instance, this compartment was A1, so they could contact the compartment A1, shut off valve number such and such, and I would transmit that information to the lead damage controlman. And they were all different ranks. You could have a first-class petty officer, you could have a seaman, you could have a lieutenant. It doesn't make any difference, you know, what your rank was. You were part of that damage control crew. And you were under the responsibility of the person responsible for that particular department. Okay. And so I was the phone operator for that, and I would transmit the information back and forth, you know, and every operation that you do is followed up by a follow-up. In other words, if the damage control central said shut off valve number 5, I would report it to the damage controlman, and he would say shut off valve number 5, and then they would say valve number 5 secured, and I would report that back, and everything was followed through step by step. And it was good training, you know. It really made you think about how things in communications can get messed up.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us about some of the safety concerns. You're just describing some of the precautions that you took, but tell us about some of the safety concerns of living on an active duty aircraft carrier.
Well, one of the major safety concerns is that you weren't, a man overboard is something that you can't really understand how somebody can fall overboard when they have railings, 4 foot high and things like that. During extreme weather conditions, you're not allowed out on the outer decks, but people do what they do, and sometimes, a wave hits, it can wash you right overboard, and it's the worst time to be washed overboard in inclement conditions because you're harder to find. But we've had that happen, at least twice. And one time the indications were that this person was committing suicide. But we've had pilots that go overboard. The landing doesn't go right, and they crash, and
We've got a picture. Oh, yeah, we've got a picture.
yeah, well, that was a major accident. That was a refueling plane that was coming back from refueling, and it was a little bit rough. And an aircraft carrier, it's not like landing in a field someplace, because the deck moves up and down, several feet in some cases, 12, 15 feet. And when that plane comes in, and this particular plane was a propeller-driven plane, and they fly a lot slower than the jets do. But unfortunately, this plane came in, and it landed on the flight deck like a pancake fashion. It came down hard and hit the deck. I mean, I'm retorting this story from what I heard. I didn't actually see it happen. I was on the bridge at the time. Again, I was a phone operator on the bridge. That was one of my watches. And this plane flipped over. And on the flight deck, there are cables to catch the aircraft. They have a hook on the back of the aircraft. And that hook is supposed to catch that cable. And that is the brake to brake the plane so that it doesn't go any further. Well, in this case, the hook didn't set, and this plane went over the barriers. They're like tennis courts, tennis nets, and it landed forward in the flight deck. At this time, the Coral Sea had a single flight deck. It had been converted in later years after I left the ship to an angled flight deck carrier, which is an awful lot safer. The plane can land and take off if it's in jeopardy, of crashing. It can take off again and, go around and come in. But, during the single flight decks, you only had so much space because you had aircraft stored on the forward end of the flight deck. And all of those aircraft were just sitting ducks there. Well, this particular plane crashed into the middle of those aircraft, and immediately the flight officer, the plane hadn't even hit the deck yet when he called general quarters, and he was I heard him. He was down on the next level below us, and I heard him because the windows were open, and he's got his head stuck out the window, watching the aircraft come in, because that's his responsibility to make sure that all the aircraft are recovered properly and so on and so forth. So I heard either him or somebody in that position down there yell general quarters, and then I heard somebody on the bridge where I was yell general quarters, and at that time, now my responsibilities change. I'm no longer a phone operator on the bridge. I have to get to my general quarters station down below decks, and that's quite a task because everybody's shutting doors and securing them and everything else, making it difficult to get there. So anyway, as I was going down and came out of what they called the bridge area, all I could see was flames and smoke and everything. I mean, it was intense. And I figured we're in for a lot of problems now, you know. But I made it to my damage control station. Now you're down below ships, you don't know anything. It's like TV's going on in the other room and you're not seeing it. You're in another place and nobody's giving you a point-to-point operations of what's going on. You know, you're all just sitting there waiting. What are we going to do? You know, there were no orders coming through to seal off any of the ship or anything, but any of the equipment. So we just sat there and waited, and then when general quarters was over, we all went back to our normal routines. And when I was leaving, I was going back up to the hangar bay near where my compartment was, and one of the Marines was there, and he saw that I had a camera, and he says, "Where were you with the camera?" I says, "Well," I was up on the bridge. I says, "I always carry my camera with me." And he says, "I got to take your camera away from you." And I had taken a couple of pictures when I come out of the bridge onto the flight deck and saw the flames and everything. I took like maybe 3 pictures. So he took those pictures, and you know, he says, "You'll have to get your camera back from the officer of the deck. You know, once we'll take the film out of it." He said, "You can't have the film." So after that, I went back. It was probably about 4 or 5 hours later. I went back and I got another roll of film, and I got my camera, and I took these pictures that were shown there. And believe it or not, I had those pictures, and I was so worried about, you know, getting caught with those pictures. I never developed those pictures until about 8 or 9 years ago. I kept telling the story about this, you know, how I had taken pictures. And my son says to me, he says, "Dad, you know, what about those pictures? You ever?" I says, "You know, I don't feel comfortable, you know, but I did develop them." And of course, I had told him about the fire, the crash, and everything. And he says, "Where's the pictures of the crash and everything?" I says, "Those are gone." I said, "That film was taken out of my camera." So there were safety concerns. Obviously, you're not allowed on the flight deck or anywhere near it during flight operations. But I used to sneak up on what they call the tower, and there was a flat spot up there. We used to, 4 or 5 of us would go up there, and we'd sit there and sunbathe and watch the flight operations. But we weren't in any danger being up there.
Well, we have another picture of you sitting on a plane that wasn't crashing. And
No, that was one of the aircraft that was on board when I first joined the Coral Sea. That's an FJ-2 fighter. It resembles a MiG fighter, the Russian fighter. Jets. They were a small fighter, a single compartment. But we actually had one of those. They had an accident on the flight deck one night. It was secured, which they secure the aircraft with cables so that they don't move. Because, you know, the way the ship moves, you wouldn't think that a 65,000-ton ship would shift and jive, etc. But I had witnessed, I've been on the flight deck sometime during heavy weather when you get like 15, 20-foot swells, and you can see the flight deck actually move like that. It undulates up and down like that. It's actually amazing. You think to yourself, when is this going to come apart, you know? But it's an interesting thing. But they've had some of these aircraft that the cables that they tied them down with would actually snap. And they snapped like guitar strings. They go ping, you know. But this particular aircraft that was tied down on the flight deck, something went wrong with the hydraulics, and they had an explosion and destroyed the plane. I have photographs of that, but I unfortunately couldn't supply them to you. I couldn't find it. Most of the photographs I took were all in 35 millimeter slides. And someday I'll have them converted to video disc, you know.
Well, you told me about being in Cuba just before Castro took over. You had an experience horseback riding. Would you tell us real briefly about that?
One of the first trips I made on the Coral Sea was to Cuba. It was just a regular exercise in the Caribbean, and we put into Guantanamo Bay. It wasn't really planned to go to Guantanamo Bay, but at the time, the revolution was starting to gain some momentum in Cuba. So we put into Guantanamo Bay specifically to supply fresh water to the base. They used to get their water from the Cuban government. The water would be let into the bay through a piping system that existed for years, apparently. And apparently the revolutionaries, etc., decided to cut the water supply off. So with the desalination plants that they have aboard the large ships, we were assigned to create the water for the land. And we had some time off that we were allowed to go ashore, and I went and played golf. They had a beautiful golf course there, and I got a terrible sunburn at that point. And we also did some horseback riding. And there were 5 of us that went horseback riding one day, and it's very mountainous in Cuba. I don't know exactly how high these mountains were, but we were up in the mountains horseback riding, and we were riding along this trail, and it was more or less like a dirt road. And so the Marines came along in a Jeep, and they told us, you know, to get down off the mountain away from that area. I said, why? What's the problem? He says, there's snipers in the woods on the other side of the fence. And he says, they like nothing better than to shoot, you know, the sailors that are on the base. So we made it pretty quick to get down out of that area.
Any regrets about leaving the service?
When I decided to join the service, my intent was to make it a career. I had no romantic aspirations or anything. I wanted to go to sea, and I was fortunate enough to go to sea. I spent 2 years in the Mediterranean cruising around. I had, remembering this is peacetime, and aside from the Suez Canal crisis, things weren't bad at all for being in the Navy. I went to several countries. I was in Lebanon and Turkey, Greece, Italy, France, Spain.
We have a picture of you in Naples, that you were still in the service then, is that?
Yeah, we made several trips to Naples.
There you
go. Yeah, that was taken in a little cafe in Naples.
And you're on the right or the left?
I'm on the right.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you can see, my sunburn has receded, but I got the tan. Naples was our home port in the Mediterranean, so we made several trips into Naples. And being on board a large ship, you don't walk off the ship onto shore. you have to travel by a motorized lifeboat or by an LCVP, which is a flat-bottomed barge that they transport vehicles to shore. They use them in combat, etc. It's not the kind of a boat you want to ride in because they are rough as the devil. It's bad enough in the motorized lifeboats, but when the weather's rough, you probably sometimes want to stay on board ship because it's harrowing to get to shore. But I spent a lot of time in Naples as a result of it being our home port. Went to several restaurants and made side trips to Sorrento, which was very nice. And a couple of other small towns near Naples. Can't really remember the names of them. But I did visit Florence, Italy. I went on a bus trip to Florence because they used to sell trips on board the ship. And when you put in ashore, like for instance, they would these vendors would sell these trips when you were in, say, if you were in France, in Cannes or something, they would sell you a trip when you get into Greece that you could board the bus and go on the trip. So these were all sold ahead of time. But I made pretty good use of my time. I did admittedly visit, these houses of prostitution, and that was an eye opener in many respects. The various types of houses of prostitution. Some of them were glorious, and some of them were just dirty, downright slums, And being in 54, 55, that's, not too long after the Second World War, and get an opportunity to witness the results of the bombings in some of these places. One of the towns I visited in Italy was Livorno, is in the northwest part of Italy near the French border. That was a town that was bombed severely because it was a naval base. And of course, if anybody remembers World War II history, the Italians were on our side, then they weren't on our side, then they were on our side. It went back and forth. Well, it was a major naval base, and that town got pretty severely bombed. Mm-hmm. And they had rebuilt the main thoroughfare. It goes up to the railroad station, and the railroad station, the front facade had been rebuilt. But behind the facade, there was practically nothing. And that was the same way with the town. The main street was beautiful, was trees, tree-lined, but you go behind the buildings, and there was ultimate devastation. I visited these people that were living in the cellar of a bombed-out building. And this obviously had been 10 years, after the war was over, and they were still living in bombed-out buildings, Regrets from leaving the Navy, as I said, I intended to make it a career. And when I left the Coral Sea was preparing to be decommissioned. And they were going to make a goodwill cruise around South America. And I wanted in the worst way to make that cruise. However, in the meantime, I had met the love of my life, and we had talked about marriage, etc., and marriage plans were starting to really develop because at the end of that cruise, I was scheduled to be discharged in February, or I think it was February or March. I was scheduled, and So we had planned to get married in April. And I said, I just can't cancel the wedding and everything, so I opted to get married. It was the right decision, but the only regret I have is not making that cruise. I was reading a little bit about the cruise from various things, and I had talked to people at a reunion that made the cruise. And that's another thing. One of the reunions that I went to, one of the largest ones, was in Las Vegas, or a place called Laughlin, Nevada. And there was nobody there from the Coral Sea, believe it or not. I think there was like 300 people there, not one person from the Coral Sea.
We've been speaking today with Tom Donnelly, veteran of the U.S. Navy. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to ABMI for their support of this project, and we will be sending copies of all these interviews to the Library of Congress. Any veteran who has ties to Bellingham or Mendon is encouraged to contact us to be interviewed here at ABMI Cable 8. The phone number for this station and my email, marjorie@marjorieturner.com, will be in the credits at the end of the program. Each person's story is unique. We'd love to hear yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. I appreciate the opportunity to have this interview done. And just remember, our veterans, some of the stories are good, some of the stories are not so good. But we have to keep our armed forces secure. Thank you very much.